The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I opened it. Blackwood and Associates, the return address read. Toronto's most prestigious law firm. I knew that name. Everyone in this city knew that name. It was where she'd worked for 30 years, where she'd built her empire. My hands shook as I finally tore it open that Thursday morning. The coffee maker beeped behind me. The same one I'd bought 23 years ago when we'd first moved into this house. Back when it was our house. Before it became just mine. Mr. William Harper, the letter began. Formal, cold. We regret to inform you of the passing of Margaret Elizabeth Harper on October 3rd, 2024. As executor of her estate, we request your attendance at the reading of her will on October 28th, 2024, at 2 p.m. I read it twice, then 3 times. Margaret was dead. My ex-wife. The woman I'd spent 18 years married to. The woman who'd left me 25 years ago and never looked back. The brilliant litigation lawyer who'd become one of Canada's most successful attorneys. The mother of my son. And apparently, she'd left something for me in her will. I sat down heavily. Outside my window, October leaves drifted down onto the lawn I'd need to rake soon. The Toronto skyline was just visible through the bare branches. Towers of glass and steel where people like Margaret lived their important lives. Where my son worked now, in one of those towers. Following in his mother's footsteps. Not mine. Never mine. The funeral had been last week. I'd seen it in the papers. Margaret E. Harper, 62, pioneering attorney and women's rights advocate, dies after brief illness. There'd been photos of hundreds of people at the service. Politicians, judges, business leaders. I hadn't gone. I wasn't invited. And I knew my presence would only upset our son. James hadn't spoken to me in 8 years. Not since his 30th birthday dinner, when he'd finally said what he'd clearly been thinking for decades. You know what, Dad? I'm tired of pretending. You were dead weight. Mom achieved everything despite you, not because of you. The only smart thing you ever did was let her go. Then he'd left, and I hadn't heard from him since. The letter didn't explain why I was in the will. What could Margaret possibly have left me? A final insult? Some small token meant to remind me of everything I'd lost? Everything I'd given up? I looked around my small house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, in a neighborhood that had been middle class when we'd bought it, but was now considered struggling. The university was a 20-minute bus ride away. The campus where I taught introductory physics to undergraduates who were too busy on their phones to care about Newton's laws. This was my life at 61. Professor William Harper, divorced, estranged from his only child, living alone in a house too big for one person, but too small for the dreams we'd once had. I picked up my phone, put it down, picked it up again. I could call James, tell him about the will reading. Maybe he'd want to talk. Maybe this could be a chance to... No, I knew better. James would be there, of course. As Margaret's son, and probably her primary beneficiary, he'd have to be. But he wouldn't want me there. He'd see my attendance as one more way I was trying to cling to a family that had moved on without me. But the lawyer had requested my attendance, so I'd go. I owed Margaret that much, even if she'd never thought I owed her anything at all. The Blackwood and Associates office was everything I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the 43rd floor of Scotia Plaza, polished marble, assistants in designer suits moving purposefully through hallways lined with awards and framed articles about the firm's biggest victories. I felt like an imposter in my 15-year-old sport coat. Mr. Harper? A young woman with a tablet approached. William Harper? That's me. Right this way. The reading will begin shortly. She led me down a corridor to a large conference room, and that's when I saw him. James stood by the window, looking out at the Toronto skyline. He'd grown his hair a bit longer since I'd last seen him. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. At 38, he looked exactly like his mother. The same sharp features, the same calculating eyes, the same air of barely contained impatience. He turned when I entered. His expression didn't change. Dad, James. We stood there, 15 feet apart, separated by 8 years of silence. I didn't know you'd be here, he said finally. The firm requested my attendance. Right. He turned back to the window. Of course they did. Mom probably left you something. She always was too generous to people who didn't deserve it. I felt that familiar ache in my chest. The one I'd been living with since he was 16 and had started looking at me with something that wasn't quite contempt, but wasn't quite respect either. James, please don't. He held up a hand. Let's just get through this, okay? You get whatever token she left you. I'll handle the estate, and we can go back to our separate lives. Before I could respond, the door opened, and an older man in an expensive suit entered. Gentlemen, I'm Richard Blackwood, senior partner. Thank you both for coming. He gestured to the conference table. Please, have a seat. James sat at the head of the table. I took a seat 3 chairs down. The distance felt appropriate. Blackwood opened a leather portfolio and removed several documents. Margaret was very specific about how she wanted this handled, he began. Before we discuss the distribution of assets, she requested that I read you both a letter. She wrote it 6 months ago, when she first received her diagnosis. I hadn't known she was sick. Nobody had told me. Why would they? Blackwood began to read. To my son, James, and to William. James shifted uncomfortably at the pairing of our names. If you're hearing this, I'm gone. I've had 6 months to prepare for this moment, which is more than many people get. 6 months to think about my life, my choices, and the truths I've kept hidden for too long. I felt my pulse quicken. James, you've built a successful career. You're everything I hoped you'd be. Smart, driven, principled. You work at Morrison in Kent, one of the top firms in the country. You're making partner next year. I'm so proud of you. James's jaw tightened slightly. But there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you years ago. Blackwood paused, glanced at both of us, then continued. When you were 12 years old, I was offered the position of a lifetime. Senior partner at what was then Harris, Blackwood, and Stern. It would have made me one of the youngest senior partners in Canadian legal history. The salary was extraordinary. The prestige was everything I'd worked for. I remembered. God, I remembered. But there was a catch. The position required extensive travel. 2 weeks out of every month, sometimes more. International cases. High-profile clients. I'd be in London, New York, Hong Kong, building a career that would define Canadian corporate law for a generation. My hands were clenched under the table. I wanted it so badly. It was everything I'd dreamed of since law school. But you were 12, James. You needed stability. You needed a parent who was present. And your father had just been offered his own opportunity, a tenured position at MIT, the most prestigious physics department in the world, a chance to conduct research that could have changed his field. James's head snapped toward me. I couldn't look at him. We had a choice to make. One of us could pursue our dream, but not both. Not with you to consider. So we sat down one night after you'd gone to bed, and we talked about what mattered most. I remembered that night. It was burned into my memory. Your father made me a promise. He said, take the partnership. I'll stay. I'll teach at U of T. I'll be the parent who's here. You go build the career you deserve. No, James said quietly. No, that's not. I fought him on it. I knew what he was giving up. MIT was his dream, but he insisted. He said that my career had more momentum, that I was closer to my goals, that it made more sense for him to step back. My vision blurred, so I took the partnership. And your father turned down MIT. He took a teaching position at U of T, a significant step down from what he could have had. And for 12 years, he was the one who made you breakfast, who helped with homework, who attended every parent-teacher conference, who was home every night when I was in London or New York or Hong Kong, building my empire. James was staring at me now. I still couldn't meet his eyes. And then, when you were 24, when my career had reached its peak, when I'd made senior partner and secured my legacy, your father asked me for a divorce. This was the part I'd never told anyone. He said he'd done what he'd promised to do. He'd been the present parent. He'd sacrificed his dreams for mine. But now you were grown, established in your own career. And he was 54 years old, watching his contemporaries win Nobel Prizes for research he could have been doing. He was teaching introductory physics to undergraduates who didn't care, living a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I remembered that conversation in this very building 25 years ago. Margaret in her corner office, me in my department store suit. I was angry. I told him he was being selfish, that he'd made a choice and needed to live with it. I told him he couldn't just walk away after all those years. But the truth was, I was terrified. Terrified that if we divorced, you'd learn the truth. That you'd know your brilliant, successful mother had built her career on your father's sacrifice. That every case I won, every client I landed, every accolade I received was possible because your father had given up his dreams to hold our family together. James's face had gone pale. So I did what I do best. I built a case. I told you that your father was having a midlife crisis, that he was being irresponsible, that he wanted out of his responsibilities. I made sure you saw him as the one who was leaving us, not as the one who'd been left behind by his own life. A tear rolled down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. And it worked. You chose my side. You saw your father as weak, as someone who couldn't keep up, as dead weight. And I let you believe it. For 25 years, I let you believe a lie because it was easier than admitting the truth. James's hands were shaking. Your father never defended himself, never told you what he'd sacrificed, never tried to turn you against me. He just accepted it, accepted the divorce, the distance from you, the life he'd been left with. He took the teaching job at U of T and stayed there, in that same small house, in that same neighborhood, teaching the same classes year after year. I had to close my eyes. Meanwhile, I became one of the most successful attorneys in Canada. I argued cases before the Supreme Court. I represented Fortune 500 companies. I made millions, and every single victory was built on a foundation I'd never acknowledged: your father's sacrifice. Blackwood's voice had grown softer. James, your father is not weak. He's not a failure. He's not dead weight. He's the man who loved you and me enough to give up MIT, to give up the career he'd spent his entire life preparing for, to spend 12 years being a father first and a physicist second. And then, when I refused to acknowledge what he'd done, he gave you up too. He let you hate him rather than poison you against me. James made a sound that might have been a sob. I'm telling you this now because I'm dying, and I've run out of time to be brave. I should have told you 25 years ago. I should have been honest about who paid the real price for my success. But I was selfish. I am selfish. I always have been. Mom, James whispered. William, if you're hearing this, I need you to know something too. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. You gave me everything, and I gave you nothing but resentment and silence. You deserved so much better. You deserved the career you'd earned. You deserved a son who knew the truth. You deserved to be seen. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. To make up for some small fraction of what I've taken from you, I'm leaving you the cottage on Lake Muskoka, the one we bought together when we were young and foolish and thought we'd grow old there. It's paid off. It's yours. I hope you find some peace there. The cottage, our cottage, where we'd spent our first anniversary, where we'd brought James as a baby. I'm also establishing the William Harper Research Fund at U of T, endowed with $5 million. It will fund physics research in perpetuity, supporting the work you never got to do. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's something. $5 million. James, I'm leaving you the house in Rosedale, my share of the firm, and the bulk of my financial assets. It's more than you'll ever need. But I'm also giving you something more important. The truth about your father. What you do with that truth is up to you. James was crying openly now. I've lived with this lie for 25 years. It's eaten at me every day. Every time I saw the distance between you two. Every time you dismissed your father or talked about him like he was somehow less than me. I knew the truth, and I said nothing. Blackwood looked up from the letter. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you both to know the truth before I died. William, you gave me the world. James, your father is a good man. The best man I've ever known. Don't let my lies poison another day between you. With whatever love I have left to give, Margaret. Silence filled the room. James stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, his back to us, his shoulders shaking. I sat frozen, 25 years of grief and vindication and sorrow washing over me all at once. Blackwood quietly gathered his papers. "I'll give you both some time," he said, and left the room. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then James spoke, his voice rough. "MIT? Yes. You turned down MIT for us? For you? And for your mother's career?" He turned around. His eyes were red. "Why didn't you tell me? When we fought, when I said all those horrible things, why didn't you defend yourself?" I stood up slowly. My knees ached. I was 61 years old, and I was so tired. "Because you were 24 years old and you loved your mother. You were just starting your career. You needed to believe in her. You needed her to be the hero of your story. So you let me think you were the villain? I let you think what you needed to think." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled me into a hug. It was the first time he'd touched me in 8 years. I felt him shaking against me. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "God, Dad, I'm so sorry. The things I said, the way I treated you. I thought, I know what you thought. I called you dead weight. I remember. You gave up MIT. You gave up everything. And I called you." His voice broke. I held my son and let him cry. Let us both cry. For everything we'd lost. Everything we'd never said. Everything Margaret had taken to her grave. And finally, mercifully, given back. "She should have told us," James said eventually. 25 years ago. "She should have been honest. She did what she thought was right at the time." "It wasn't right." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't." He pulled back, wiping his eyes. "The research fund, $5 million. Dad, it's generous. It's not enough." "No," I said again. "But it's something." We stood there, father and son, separated by 25 years of lies and 5 feet of expensive carpet. "Can we?" James started. "Would you want to?" He took a breath. "I'd like to try again. If you're willing. I know I don't deserve it, but—" "James." I put my hand on his shoulder. "You're my son. We can always try again." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "The cottage," I said. "On Lake Muskoka. Maybe we could go up there sometime. I haven't been back in 25 years. I'd like that. There's good fishing. Or there used to be. I don't know how to fish." "I can teach you?" Something shifted in his expression. "You can teach me? If you want to learn." "I do." He smiled through his tears. "I really do." 3 weeks later, we drove up to the cottage. It was late November, cold enough that the lake had a skim of ice at the edges. The cottage needed work. New shingles, paint, probably a new furnace. But the bones were good. James helped me carry firewood from the shed. We worked in comfortable silence, learning how to be around each other again. That night, we sat on the dock, wrapped in blankets, drinking coffee and watching the stars. "Tell me about MIT," James said. "What would you have researched?" So I told him. About quantum mechanics and particle physics. About the questions I'd wanted to answer. About the work I'd dreamed of doing. He listened. Really listened. For the first time in decades, my son was interested in what I had to say. "The research fund," he said eventually. "You could use it. Apply for the grant yourself." "I'm 61, James." "So? You're not dead." I smiled. "No, I'm not dead. And you're still a physicist. You still know how to ask questions." "Yes. So ask them. Do the research. It's 25 years late, but it's not too late." I looked out at the dark water. "Maybe, definitely." He bumped my shoulder with his. "And I'll help. I don't know anything about physics, but I can read contracts. Make sure the university doesn't screw you over on the funding." "That would be good. That's what sons do for their fathers, right? Look out for them?" My throat tightened. "Yes, that's what sons do." We sat there until the cold drove us inside. We ate sandwiches and talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his work, his life, his girlfriend he'd been dating for 2 years. I told him about my students, about the young woman in my Tuesday class who reminded me of him at that age. Brilliant and skeptical and hungry for answers. Around midnight, he stood to go to bed. Dad? Yeah? Thank you. For MIT. For everything. You're welcome. I mean it. You gave up your dream for me. I'll never be able to repay that. I don't want repayment. I wanted you to have a good life. And you do. Because of you. Because of both of us. Your mother and me, we both wanted the best for you. He nodded slowly. She did too, didn't she? In her own way. She did. I'm angry at her. For lying. But I miss her too. That's allowed. Is it? Of course. I stood up, my back creaking. People are complicated. We can miss them and be angry at them at the same time. Are you angry at her? I thought about it. I was. For a long time. But now I'm just tired. And grateful. Grateful? She gave you back to me. In the end, she gave you back. James's eyes filled with tears again. Yeah, she did. We said goodnight. I lay in bed listening to the lake water lap against the dock. The same sound I'd fallen asleep to 25 years ago, when Margaret and I had been young and the future had been full of possibilities we couldn't imagine. I'd made a choice back then, to sacrifice my dream for my family, and I'd paid for it. God, how I'd paid for it. 25 years of distance from my son. 25 years of teaching intro physics instead of conducting groundbreaking research. 25 years of wondering if I'd made the right choice. But lying there in that cottage, with my son asleep in the next room, I finally had my answer. I'd made the right choice. Not because of the career I'd lost, or the recognition I'd never received, but because of this moment, this second chance, this opportunity to know my son again. Margaret had taken 25 years from us, but she'd also given us back the truth. And with that truth, we could build something new. I thought about the research fund. $5 million. Enough to do real work. Enough to ask the questions I'd been carrying around for decades. I was 61, but I wasn't dead. James was right about that. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. James was already up, sitting on the deck with his laptop. Morning, he called. I've been looking into the research fund. The paperwork should be finalized by January. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to, he grinned. Besides, I want to tell people my dad's a research physicist. Sounds better than intro physics professor. Both are physics professors. Yeah, but one's cooler. I laughed. Actually laughed. When was the last time I'd done that? We spent the day winterizing the cottage, draining pipes, covering windows, storing furniture. Working side by side, we talked about my research ideas. James asked questions, good questions, and I tried to explain quantum mechanics to a lawyer. As we locked up that evening, James turned to me. Let's make this a tradition. Come up here every few months, work on the cottage, fish in the summer, talk. I'd like that. Me too. He paused. Dad, I know I can't get back the last 8 years, but I'd like to try to make up for them. You don't have to make up for anything. I want to. Please let me try. I put my hand on his shoulder. Okay. We'll try together. We drove back to Toronto as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The same highway we'd driven so many times when he was young. When we were a family, maybe we still were. Maybe we could be again. 6 months later, I submitted my first research proposal using the Margaret Harper Fund. The university approved it. I hired 2 graduate students and started asking the questions I'd been carrying around since 1999. James came to the lab once a week. He didn't understand most of what we were doing, but he showed up anyway. He asked questions. He brought coffee. He was there. We went to the cottage every other month, fixed it up slowly. James learned to fish. I taught him about the stars, about physics, about the questions that had driven me my entire life. He started bringing his girlfriend, Emma. She was smart and kind, and she made him happy. They talked about getting married. One evening, as we sat on the dock watching the sunset, James said, "Do you think Mom knew when she wrote that letter that it would bring us back together? I think she hoped. She paid a hell of a price for her career. We all did. Was it worth it? For her?" I thought about Margaret. Brilliant, driven Margaret, who'd won every case, who'd changed Canadian law, who'd died with millions in the bank and regret in her heart. I don't know. Only she could answer that. Would you do it again? Give up MIT? I looked at my son, at the man he'd become, at the relationship we were slowly, carefully rebuilding. Yes, I said, I would. Even knowing how it turned out? The divorce, the distance, all of it? Even knowing all of that. Because it brought me here, to this moment. With you. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm going to do better than you and Mom did. With Emma. When we have kids, we're going to figure out how to both have careers and both be present. We have to. We've seen what happens when we don't. That's good. I don't want my kids to have to choose between their parents. Then don't make them. Will you help? When we have kids, will you be part of their lives? The question hit me harder than I expected. You want that? Of course I want that. You're my dad. You gave up MIT for me. The least I can do is let you spoil your grandchildren. I smiled, tears in my eyes for the 1,000th time in the past 6 months. I'd be honored. We sat there as the sun disappeared below the horizon, father and son, rebuilding what had been broken. It wasn't perfect. We still had awkward moments, still stumbled over old wounds, but we were trying. And trying, I'd learned, was enough. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the letter Margaret had written, the truth she'd finally told, the gift she'd given us in death that she couldn't give us in life. I forgave her, not because what she did was right, but because holding on to anger was too heavy a burden, and I was tired of carrying heavy things. Tomorrow, I'd go back to the lab. I'd work on research that might never win a Nobel Prize, but mattered to me anyway. I'd have dinner with James and Emma. I'd live my life. Not the life I'd planned, not the life I dreamed of, but the life I had. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The phone on my nightstand buzzed. A text from James. Love you, Dad. See you Tuesday. I typed back, love you too, son. 3 words. Simple, true, and 25 years overdue. But finally said. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. Outside, the lake was quiet. Inside, for the first time in a quarter century, so was my heart.